Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Piss. Ukraine War Frontline update for the 23rd of May, 2024. If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please check out the key on the screen at the moment, pause the video. In the meantime, let's go to the front line. You can see that, amazingly, there is no change to that those two northern sectors, which is pretty incredible in my books. We can see that, yeah, none of the mappers have changed that area. There have been a number of claims saying that the Ukrainians are fighting back there. Latest geolocation, fighting shows more and more gains by Ukrainian forces, says David D. Although, you know, not a source I'd always completely trust, very pro-Ukrainian to the point of making some erroneous claims, but these are repeated in a number of places. 57th Brigade now in a fight along with a mixed brigade. So he's got a list of those forces fighting in the Vovchansk area, pushing back. It's pretty horrific in Vovchansk. There's I've seen videos of lots of civilians dead on the streets and whatnot that didn't get a chance to evacuate. But nonetheless, the Ukrainians are fighting back. Well, they must be because the Russians haven't made those gains. They seem to have stalled there. It's been I think, a less than impressive attack, given that they appear to have thrown all their spare kind of reserves there. There's even talk that they're drawing some of their own troops from the Kupiansk front line, which seems like wholly bizarre. The idea is that this is diversionary to draw Ukrainian troops from places like the Kupiansk front line so that they can attack in those places, so that they have an overwhelming ratio. And yet here they are drawing troops from the places they're supposed to be diverted from. I don't know. I can't definitely confirm that, but it just seems very bizarre to me and a little sort of ill thought out. Nonetheless, the Ukrainians are losing, I think, more equipment there than they would have done. But again, I would have put those 50,000 troops in Chaziv Yar and overrun Chaziv Yar. But hey, what do I know? Right, Kupiansk to Svatova to Kremina. As you can see, no changes to the front line there either. That is a fairly significant outcome. There's been some movement in the Stanwikivka area and up in the Tabaivka areas, but actually, the last few days it's been really stable. That's good news for the Ukrainians. Torska and Terny area to the west of Kremina, no change. No change in Bilohorivka. There is some activity north of Bakhmut, though, according to Syriac maps, that says that in the Vasily area, the Russians over the last 2 days have made new advances southwest of Spirna, north of Vasily. Currently, the Russian forces are trying to capture the trench system located in the heights that overlook Rozdalivka from the northeast. Okay, let's go and have a look a little bit at the topography here. So we have Rozdalivka there, possibly some heights over here. If we look at the bottom right hand of the map, you can see how high areas are. 107, going up to 150, 160 meters here, 175, 180, 190. Okay, so it looks like you've got the heights sort of around here that they are trying to take. Let's go and zoom in on a 3D, and we can see, oh, that is some fairly challenging ground there. They're moving up onto those heights, down a sort of part of the beginning of a valley. And yeah, from high ground where they were at over here, this is still like 70 meters or so, 60 meters below what it is over on in the area that they are apparently aiming for. That is what Syriac Maps is claiming. None of the other mappers showing that. And also this movement to towards, well, sort of Vyimka is the place they were going. It's kind of southwest of Spirna, leaving a bit of a pocket there if the Russians have indeed taken that land. So this is another area where the Russians have this has always been fairly active, and it has been over the months, sort of stops and starts. But you know, if they're really putting some major pressure on there, then that would I guess give the Ukrainians something else to think about in terms of where they position their reserves and what defensive lines they shore up. Right, then we're going to come on down to Bakhmut area, to Chaziv Yar and the Klishivka area. I'm just going to show you something that JR has done. We were talking about this earlier today. He came up with an idea. I was like, yeah, that sounds awesome. And this concerns photographs that we can add to the map to give us a sense of place. So here we have, for example, Klishchivka and Chasiv Yar, the Chasiv Yar channel there. I don't know where that suddenly went. We're going to have a look at them. These are the purple pins on the map. So before we talk about what's been happening around Chasiv Yar, let's have a look at the canal here and see whether, yep, that's what the canal looks like. There's some explosion. That's a bridge that has been blown up. And that was, indeed, that's a really good picture, actually. So this was a bridge that was built fairly recently. It's not one of the established bridges. It was more of a makeshift bridge that was built across near these pipes here. And that was blown up somewhat recently. I reported that a few weeks back. So it's a great picture to give us a sense of what's going on there. And we have the Canal Micro District here, which is, as you can see, there gives you a sense of what Chasiv Yar is like at the moment. That church just left with in the middle. I hope that's not flames burning there. I hope that's the golden top of the church, but who knows. And yeah, some images from Klishchivka as well. Here in this image we see the railway as it comes around the north of Klishchivka and curls down to go south. That is it, curling around and then going south. And this is Klishchivka going down this way, Klishchivka there, with that pond, that reservoir just starting there. So that if you shifted this image 90 degrees in a clockwise direction, it would be exactly there. So that's great to be able to get a sense of position. In Klishchivka itself, we can see the destruction that's been wrought on that village where it's been completely rubblized. So when we're talking about fighting for Klishchivka, you can see those hills over there. Those are the hills to the west. And you can see that that high ground really does give them a line of sight advantage. So that's up here looking down to there. So those hills are over here. So this is looking north to south. So that's looking down this way. And it's, you know, not a big place. There aren't very many roads, and they all just completely rubblized the buildings there, giving not a lot of shelter. So that's really great for JR to have done that. What a legend. There's another one down here. In fact, we're going to be talking about Andriivka because this is one of the newsworthy places today. And again, it's very similar to Klishchivka by point of fact that, hey, there ain't much left of it. It is just a set of rubblized houses, just a kind of square of houses, if you like. There, and yeah, that's in the Frontline news today. So really good stuff. Thanks for that, JR. And they'll remain there, and we can change pictures as and when they are relevant. It just gives us that sort of reference point and something to give us a sense of place. Right. Remember, I've got the grey zone lines at the moment, which means that the second blue line. So we've got this is the Russian defensive line for Andriy Perpetua, the Russian defensive line for Deep State Map, the Russian defensive line for Surat Maps, and this one is the Ukrainian defensive line, in this case further to the west. And that gives you a sense of where the grey zone is, at least as far as Andriy Perpetua is concerned. But as you can see here, Surat Maps is claiming that the Russians have made gains, taking up the whole of the grey zone in that northern part of the Canal Micro District, and taking up positions where the Ukrainians had their defensive line, according to Andriy Perpetua. Although he's either a counterattack from the Ukrainians or some rejigging of the mapping slightly to the north of there between Kalanina and the Canal Micro District. Let's go and check some of these claims out. So here we have, that's the Vasily one, we've done that. So here we have Surat Map saying the Russian army made new advances on the dachas north of the Canal Micro District. Clashes with the Ukrainian army continue along the railway and the eastern part of Kalinina, although it doesn't signify the change of mapping in the Ukrainian favour there, which I always find quite interesting. Just slips it in quietly. Yeah, so that's some challenge for the Ukrainians. They are under the cosh all along this front in Chasiv Yar, but they have done a really good job of keeping the Russians back. Deep State Maps claiming that Russians have pushed forward south of Canal Micro District, which is kind of in accordance with Surat Maps in this nature reserve, I think it is, this area of forestry there, and that's north of the T0504. There is the culvert along here, along the canal where that's just north of there, where the Russians are probably seeking to get across. So you can see it goes under the ground there and comes out over here, and that's probably where the Russians are aiming for in trying to get across the canal into this forestry area and then attack to the north there. Okay, so that is Chaziv Yar. We come further south of Bakhmut to Klishchivka, where deep state maps are agreeing that the Russians have made some gains to the north of Klishchivka, but certainly not as charitable as Surat maps, that is not only claiming from yesterday, claimed that all of Klishchivka was taken. All of this trench network was taken in one fell swoop. The Russians just did all of that. And it's just, I can't see that as being true. And then claiming today that Andriivka has fallen to the Russians. Situation south of Bakhmut, Russian army fully secured the village of Andriivka and continue towards the water canal. So that is further to the west. Now the Russians might well be and probably are making gains in these areas, but whether they took all of this land in just the short period that Surat Maps indicates, I think is not very credible. But we'll see. It may be correct. Right, then we come on down to the Avdiivka area, where no change again to this move towards Nova Alexandriivka, towards this watercourse, and then the main road that connects Konstantinivka to Pokrovsk. They seem to have stalled there, in fact, all along this northern area, Novobakhmutivka area too. That's good news for the Ukrainians, although these attacks seem to go in fits and starts, so it's not to say there won't be any movement tomorrow or going forward. And some Russians gaining in Umanska as well. This area, this town, one of the last villages that hadn't quite yet been taken, and certainly hasn't according to the other mappers, but in this area of the Derna River that comes down here, you had Bedichi, Semenivka, Orlivka, and then across as it doglegs round towards the west to Umanska there. You got Yasna Brodivka, and you got Netailove. That Netailove is the one that is, I mean, everyone agrees is almost entirely or indeed entirely controlled by the Russians now. So yeah, just a little bit of gain in that whole Avdiivka sector, I think, is good news for the Ukrainians. And then we come down to the Krasnohorivka sector, where Deep State Map and Surat Maps are claiming that the Russians have made some gains in the southwest of the town. Here you can see Surat Map says over the last 4 days, the Russians managed to capture Fermerska Street and Alexandrovskoye farm base on the western part of Krasnohorivka. Combats with the Ukrainian army continue in the center of the town without changes. So fighting still taking place in the center of Krasnohorivka. It's somewhere that the Russians would sorely want. Ukrainians would not want to allow the Russians to take that, because it gives them the key to really all of this larger area. They'd rather keep the Russians there rather than closer to all these other settlements further to the west. And some claims concerning Novomykhailivka moving through Parashkivivka, where, according to Surat Maps, the Russians have made some small gains in that small village, taking another road there and moving to the west on the way to Konstantinivka. So that's the eastern front. It's worth noting that another Su-25 has been shot down. I don't know where. That's a second in 2 days. It's shot down by the 110th. I don't know where the 110th are, but my guess is probably in the east. That seems to be where they're having most of their success, where the Russians are using those planes and where the Ukrainians can hit them, rather than along the northern border. You've had all these arguments about shooting into Belgorod and across the border, and I don't know that they're using them as much in the south. They are using them along the Dnipro River, but yeah, I think it's more likely that Su-25 was shot down. And there is some imagery of the planes. There were 2 planes, and then there's imagery of it seemingly, it blown up and smoking. Although, you can't necessarily tell it is a plane, but nonetheless, there is at least some evidence of that being shot down. Here we're going to go to the Velika Novosilka sector, where the Russians are having quite a bit of joy at the moment in taking some success. Joy is probably the wrong word, in taking Staromyolsky, moving through that settlement and then making some gains to the west, as according to Syriac maps. It says here, as you can see, over the last few days the Russian army has made new advances in Staromyolsk, taking control of 40% of the settlement. In addition, new advances were made by Russian troops adjacent to the road towards Rivnepil. Rybar has also talked about this sector. Rybar is a very pro-Russian source, saying after some pause, Russian troops have continued their offensive in the Vremiskoye direction, Vremivka direction, which is Velika Novosilka area that we're at. In the past few weeks, the artillery and aviation launched dozens of strikes in the rear areas of the AFU, preparing the ground for a renewed assault. In Staromyolsk, assault aircraft, so they are saying that they're using them in this area actually, managed to advance by 150 meters along Vishneva and Tsvetstusha streets, seizing 4 enemy strongholds. Assault aircraft, I'm pretty sure that's supposed to mean assault troops. The Ukrainian forces are stubbornly clinging on to the ruins of the village, but aviation and drones suppress the Ukrainian positions, which are then cleared by our infantry in Uruzhaina. The Russian armed forces are advancing in low-rise buildings on the southern outskirts of the village. The Russian soldiers advance along Sadova Street and a neighbouring forest plantation, gaining control, taking control of up to 10 buildings and destroying a group of enemy infantry, says the Russian source. Nevertheless, Ukrainian forces still maintain a presence in part of the buildings of the agricultural complex, the clearing of which is necessary for further advancement in the locality. So I'm not sure exactly what they're talking about with regard to agricultural complexes. Probably here, could be this one over to the east. They all appear to be agricultural complexes. This Uruzhaini means harvest in English, so this is an agricultural area, no doubt. Rybar finishes off by saying the Russian armed forces are also systematically hitting the logistics of the Ukrainian forces. In particular, Russian aviation is working on the bridge over the Mokryali River, Bolshaya Novosilovka. So that's in Velika Novosilka in the Russian transcription. Over the past month, this is the 3rd airstrike on the bridge, the destruction of which will complicate the logistics of the Ukrainian armed forces at the site. So if we go to the north of Uruzhaina, down the river, we get to Velika Novosilka, and that will be one of these bridges, either that one or this one there. So yeah, that's what they're aiming for, using aviation supposedly effectively in that sector. Right. Now we're going to come out of that sector and come to Robotyne, where there are some gains for the Russians to the north of Verbove. If we come to Syriac maps again, so most, if not all of these claims, pretty much, there's a few deep state map changes, are Syriac maps taken with a pinch of salt, but it could be prescient about concerning what will happen if it hasn't already. Situation not there. We're going to here. Situation on the Zaporizhia front. During the last few days, the Russian army made new advances northwest of Verbove, taking control over a series of trenches from the Ukrainian army there. And the final thing to say is something I couldn't really say the other day, but I gave you enough hints. It is that this is coming from Stanislav Osman, who's been positioned in Bakhmut previously. Now in the Krinky area, Ukrainian servicemen of the 24th ADL Battalion reports about changes on the left bank around Krinky. The message still raises many questions. Our troops have left Krinky, advanced and established themselves in another safer place on the left bank. Today, the Russians suffered as many casualties as possible from cluster bombs. So he's thought it doesn't really quite make sense, because he's saying they pulled out and gone to safer positions on the left bank. So yeah, left bank, if I just get rid of the contested lines, because they get a bit confusing around the area of the river here. So here we have Krinky, and the idea is that they might move to the left bank, but I've heard that they basically pulled out of Krinky. Clarification, we took a more fortified territory on the left bank and moved to it. I have heard also that they have that Krinky, basically the Ukrainians are pulling out of Krinky, and that they are moving to elsewhere on the front line to help out. But who knows? We shall see. They could have another position somewhere else, because at the end of the day, Krinky is just completely flattened. It's very much like the images we saw in Klishchiivka and Andriivka. These are, you can look at this mapping, and you can see the number of buildings there. And some of these quite substantial sort of warehouses for agricultural produce and whatnot. These are all flattened, just rubbleized completely, and so it doesn't offer an awful lot of protection. And there are needs, even though it's really useful that Ukrainians are on this side of the river here, there are needs elsewhere on the front line, and it could be that they have been drafted elsewhere where they are needed. Anyway, we'll wait to see of any confirmation of that going forward. And that's a frontline update for you today. Thanks so much to Geo, who's done the mapping so meticulously. Really appreciate his assistance. He's an absolute legend. Thanks so much for watching. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.